Welcome to another episode of the Most Serious Podcast. And today I have Ryan Bush with me. And Ryan is an author. Ryan is someone who you might have come across one way or the other on the internet. And I'm super grateful, Ryan, for coming on the show. And let's just tell me what you're thinking today. What's been the primary piece of focus that's been on your mind today?
Oh, great question. Yeah, and I'm happy to be here too. Thanks for having me. But yeah, today I'm actually kind of still making little tweaks to the manuscript at this point. I'm almost to the point where I have to lock it in, and so I'm responding to a lot of kind of feedback from early readers and trying to integrate it and pull this whole thing together. So I'm kind of thinking about everything from, everything from like refining this theory and updating the research and stuff of all of it to like making an animation video to help demonstrate it to people really quickly. So it's a lot of craziness right now, but I'm excited to have people like you. I can come and kind of discuss it and informally and just explore the philosophy.
What does becoming who you are actually translate to? When I say these words, what does it mean? What's the initial thought that comes to your head?
Yeah, so the words have an interesting philosophical history. Nietzsche talked about becoming who you are, and Nietzsche was always very cryptic in his writing. It's hard to know what anything means unless you've really explored like all of his books, and I kind of have at this point. So I've been able to piece together what he was talking about, and I've concluded that it's very similar to what Abraham Maslow was talking about, for example, when he talked about self-actualization, self-becoming, becoming the person you were sort of meant to be. And I think that in many ways, this is, it's destined in a sense, it's built into our genes and our brains because we have these innate ideals, these innate values that we are constantly evaluating the world around us according to. We are constantly observing people and their behaviors that we admire and others that we disapprove of. And in many ways, these impulses inside of us that we don't all pay that much attention to, they essentially provide a map or a compass for navigating our lives and deciding where to go so that we can become that person that we admire. That currently we're seeing all these other people that embody these ideals. How do we get to where those ideals and the reality of our personal character and our actions and our lives line up? I think when you get to that point, that's when you've become who you are, when your own ideals and admiration lines up with who you are in reality. And I think yeah, it's really interesting to explore how different philosophers and different scientists have basically all said the same thing in a lot of different ways. And a lot of what I'm doing in this book is kind of piecing all those different ways together and into a coherent kind of map or a theory.
When I was reading and before we just started recording, I was talking to you about this only, that how much I appreciated just the introduction of the book and how it felt like you had an insight into my own mind. Um, and we were discussing Dostoevsky, and we were discussing like how writers who just write with no filter and who are just able to translate what's going on in your head into a piece of text, that certainly makes it just one hell of a journey for any reader. I want to really know that when you say your ideals, when you say who you think you are, when you say like the mental models you've built, or just the whatever data set that you've consumed in your life, and then you've made something out of it, how do you know that that is truly you and that's not just a eclectic mix of your surroundings, your environment?
Great question. And I think Nietzsche is actually a great one to consult on this because he talked about the process for doing this. And one of the early steps is to kind of take a philosophical wrecking ball to all of your current beliefs, all of your cultural baggage that you've inherited, and seeing what kind of remains after you've knocked all that down. And so it takes a period of questioning the sort of cultural ideals, questioning the things that are lifted up in our society, rejecting those and saying, no, what really is it that brings me this kind of pride and fulfillment? And I think the way to do that is through a kind of experimental process. So as you go through your life, you try different things, you try on different masks, you could say, different versions of you. You try a lot of things out that aren't going to be rewarding, that aren't really for you, even though you thought that was you. And you have to learn from these experiments and say, and when you notice that something really is deeply fulfilling, you got to pay attention to that, and you got to design your life around it. Now, these are the traits that have been called virtues in the past. We don't hear that word as much today, unfortunately, but essentially, the ancient Greeks, for example, talked about the importance of these virtues for our own happiness. And they said, basically, if you live a virtuous life, you will live a happy life. You will achieve this peak kind of well-being called eudaimonia. And the more you can align with these deep sort of these deep virtues that we observe throughout cultures, it kind of doesn't matter. We see it in everyone. The higher you climb in terms of your well-being. And so the way to figure that out is to take a step and then listen for the reaction. Listen to your own mental reactions, the pride you feel, the admiration you have for yourself. And when you do something that maybe you've been encouraged to do in your society, and then you don't feel that great about yourself, maybe you even feel a little bit ashamed of what you've done, you got to really pay attention to that, and you got to design your life around that, and kind of craft the different domains that allow you to bring out your virtues accordingly.
So Ryan, like I recently shot an episode. It was I think it's released now. Yeah. So I recently released an episode on the life of Benjamin Franklin, and I read his autobiography early this year, and he had these 13 virtues. And during that episode, I was talking about how just having a set of virtues, how just having some set of values ties so close to, it's just a code of conduct. It's just giving structure to your life. It's just giving more order, and also it allows you to know actually what you stand for. And I felt that that's just a great model to live your life in general, because I can say for myself that sometimes we are just floating around in a mix of whatever's been presented to us. And because that experiment with that wrecking ball is, I don't know, why do we put that away? Maybe we can talk about this also. Why do you think people put away that confrontation with themselves of trying to figure out who they really are?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, I really like the model that Benjamin Franklin kind of used in his own life, and those virtues he developed, very similar to my own in a lot of ways. It is funny to note that he created like this really rigorous kind of habit schedule of bringing out all these virtues, and he found it to be like way too overwhelming and demanding, and kind of gave up on that. It's a funny thing to note, but I think a lot of people kind of put off this process because there's a lot of uncomfortable stuff that you'll come across when you do. You're inevitably going to realize that you personally fall short of a lot of the things you value in a lot of ways, and it's going to take a long process to eventually get there and line up with it. It is much easier to distract yourself, and you have a million tools today for doing that. There's all kinds of distractions, and some people truly are able to fill all of their time with distractions to the point where they don't actually ever spend any time with themselves. And it's crazy. But I've heard therapists suggest to their patients, why don't you try going on a walk without putting in the headphones and listening to something? And they're like, oh my God, why? Like, I would never do that. That sounds like boring and scary. And like, I think it's in some ways we have too many ways of escaping the uncomfortable truths we need to face in our mind. I developed this set of introspection cards in responding to this exact thing, because I realized that the kind of questions I was going on long walks and asking myself that allowed me to get a lot of clarity on who I was and what I needed to do are not questions that most people are asking themselves when they're kind of at the early stages of their lives. So I made 81 prompts that you could go on a walk and take a card every day and write down the answers to these questions, like who do you admire and what do you admire about them, right? What are the 10 people that provide the most sort of inspiration for who you want to become? And what are those traits? And how can you build a little more of those traits into your own life, right? These are the kind of questions that I think we all need to be asking and mapping out, and no one really forces us to. No one ever really tells us to.
I think we can definitely link those up for people to get their hands on those cards. I also one other resource similar to what you're talking about is a list of 45 difficult questions by Morgan Housel. Have you heard of that list?
No, I
So
haven't.
I think I'll probably share that with you. It's definitely so thought provoking, and sometimes I think that uh some of these questions are so hard, and like some of these questions maybe they're not so hard as well, but you just have predisposed answers fed to your mind that's your initial response, just to wave them off. So you don't want to get to that level where you are actually answering those questions. Like if someone asks you, something which is personal, something which is challenging, which requires you to probe in, then you would have already set of answers which is surface level answers that you're ready for, that you can just kind of deliver. And I think that is something I've observed, that we get into that loop of just thinking that we are limited to those answers, we're limited to that surface level experience. But once you really start to sit down, and for me, Ryan, this has been like a journey with meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I feel that I'm consistent with meditation, whenever I feel that I allow myself the time, there is so much more authenticity, there is so much more sense of self as well. Like almost all of that rushness, almost all of that, panic of getting somewhere, trying to go somewhere, kind of settles down, and you can try to live life at your own pace. Do you have similar
Yeah.
experiences with meditation or any insights that you want to share?
Yeah, I have an interesting relationship with meditation and mindfulness and all that because from a really early age, I was very interested in my own mind. I was very interested in observing my own thoughts and emotions and even going in and trying to change them and saying like, "Oh, can I, make myself feel this emotion when this happens instead of the negative one?" And so this was kind of my fascination as I was kind of a teenager, and other people were paying attention to the world around them. I was paying attention to the world inside me. And so,
Right, yeah.
yeah. And so in many ways, I think I was doing something similar to meditating from that early age. When I got a little older and I started hearing all about mindfulness and meditation, I was like, oh, this is right up my alley. I need to try this. And I started, when I was in college, I meditated every day for a year. Not like for an insane long amount of time, but like 10-15 minutes a day. And there were some benefits that definitely came along with it. I think I was less invested in myself. I think I was, better able to focus on things that were not that interesting to me. But overall, I sort of came to the conclusion that I'm naturally kind of like someone who has a meditative practice that I don't even try to do, that's more cognitive introspection. And I sort of get my meditation exercise through that. It's almost like running on the treadmill versus playing tennis. It's like,
Hmm.
running on the treadmill clearly is a good activity to do that will get you in shape. Playing tennis is just a really fun thing that you can take as sort of a path to mastery, and you'll get in shape through the process without making it a deliberate practice. That being said, I've realized that a lot of people don't have this metacognitive awareness, and they really don't know what's going on inside their own head, and they really do just accept their thoughts as reality immediately. And that's why I've made mindfulness and meditation kind of a prerequisite in all of my books. Everything I've created, I generally start out by telling people you should probably be meditating, you should be observing your thoughts and trying to get better at knowing what's going on in your head, because if you don't know what's going on up there, you can't actually change it. You got no shot.
There's similar to what you said. So I think Alan Watts said this, that if you are thinking all the time, then you have nothing to think about than thoughts.
Right. Yeah, it's true. That's the role that metacognition plays, of stepping back and thinking about the thoughts and observing the thoughts. And Alan Watts he's one of my favorite thinkers, teachers. I love everything he's done. And it's it's interesting that he has a book called Become What You Are, and I'm coming out with this book called Become Who You Are. And there is some interesting interactions between those ideas. I don't necessarily accept some of the ideas that are very common in Buddhism and Taoism and that kind of thing, that we shouldn't have a sense of self, that we should transcend our ego entirely. One of the arguments I make in this book is that the ego, or the self, it can cause us a lot of suffering, right? But it can also produce the greatest, deepest happiness when we become a self that we're truly proud of. And so instead of trying to disable that self, I encourage people to work on it and enhance it and build it up to the point where you can honestly say you're proud of that self and you're happy to get to be a self that you love every day.
I see so many similarities between the journey that you've took, and similar to like how I've had these introductions with similar things like mindfulness, meditation, or just all of these authors. I really want to
Right.
know this, like, because I know, Ryan, I think it's not as uncommon for people to have these thoughts, for people to have a realization of maybe self, or maybe just their mind. But this is very uncommon, that going on and writing books about it and becoming a very well established author, making people reconnect with their own selves, and just doing that extra step. So most of the people, they stop at once they're kind of in a okay place with themselves. But
Mm-hmm.
what was it that pushed you to do all of this? Like, why did you write books? Why did you think of giving back, in a sense? And also, like, what was the need to share?
Great question. A lot of answers to that. I mean, for one thing, we talk about giving back, like, oh, I got all these personal benefits from these ideas, and now I need to do the altruistic, self-sacrificing thing and give it to others. And the reality is that sharing these ideas and being able to put all of my personal strengths together into my work has been the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And so it's very selfishly rewarding to put your work out there and share it with people and see that they're benefiting from it. But really, it was around 2017, 2018, I was coming to the conclusion that I had this note-taking app that I was like crashing because I had so many notes in it from the last decade of both observing my own mind and researching and studying and reading all these other books. And so I had all these ideas. I was like my brain is going to explode if I don't get them out somewhere. And also, there's clearly a book here that people could benefit from. So I need to do the work to actually put that book together. I sometimes say I was waiting for someone else to write this book for my first book, and then I realized at one point I was going to have to do it. But at that point, I sort of figured out a way to combine all these different things that that I'd been building up skills in. I combined the philosophy and the psychology that I'd been so interested in with the design skill set and business and marketing that I had been studying in school and everything, and sort of brought it all together in one place. And that's one of the most powerful things you can do. If you can
Yeah.
find a way to combine all of your strengths and passions into one place, it just kind of takes off and goes crazy. And so I went part-time at my current job at the time. I went, 2 days a week, 60% pay cut, so that I could write this book 3 days a week, and figure everything out for that. And that's what kind of started all this path, that first book, and then enabled me to piece together and write the second one, and all the programs and products that I built along with it. So it's it's been a selfishly very rewarding path, but it's good to know that from a more selfless kind of perspective, it has helped a lot of people and changed lives even.
It sure has, Ryan. And I feel like you have tinkered a lot with human psychology and philosophy. Certainly, most of the people that who end up listening to this show have. So I really want to ask this question to you, that you've understood a lot of stuff, or at least we believe, or you believe that you have. Let's try to see what are the things that you still struggle to understand about human nature, human philosophy, human psychology.
Very good question. I do have like a special part of my notes app where I write down like plot holes or things that don't fully add up to me, and I think some of them are pretty deep in the weeds of this theory and everything, but some of them are a little bigger picture. I mean, I am very curious about human values and the role that they play in our well-being and how we develop them. The stance I've taken, and what I think is most likely, is that we do have a common core of values and virtues that we share pretty much across cultures, and that they play a very important role in our psychology and our mood and our well-being. But sometimes the kind of thought that keeps me up at night is, what if that's not true? What if we really do just have these values that we inherit from our society, and there's no universal core to any of it, and it doesn't necessarily affect our satisfaction? So what if I really could, start taking actions that I didn't approve of and be perfectly happy doing it? I mean, I don't see that as a real likely possibility, but I do like to remind myself I could be wrong in some of these assumptions. And there is definitely some mystery left. I want to understand a lot about happiness works on the neurological level that I don't fully understand. I mean, we've got these sort of neurochemicals that everyone thinks they have a general idea of, like, oh, dopamine is like the pleasure one and serotonin is like happiness, but there's a lot more to it than that. Every time I dig into it, I'm just overwhelmed by the complexity of our brains. And ultimately figuring out how we can overcome some of the tendencies like habituation that we develop in our brains. I mean, can we truly get to where we can be content no matter what? Can we truly get to a place of deep equanimity, to the point where we don't our happiness doesn't just disappear after we accomplish that new thing? We don't start worrying when that threat comes along that threatens to take it, and we truly can get to a place where we're just content no matter what happens. I think it's that question of true enlightenment, I think, is one of the big question marks, because I haven't gotten there myself, and as a result, I don't know if the people who claim that they have are being honest with the world or being honest with themselves. And so I would love to know the answer of true enlightenment and whether it's possible.
It's a very interesting segue to what you've just mentioned, that I am trying to think of what are my thoughts on, can you actually achieve a state of contentment or happiness wherein it is not subject to the how your environment plays out. I think it brings me back to that just that mental exercise of how meditation, mindfulness actually works, like taking a step back, realizing what contentment actually means, taking a step back and realizing what happiness actually means to you, and not what's the standard definition of it. And trying to spend more time there, and trying to see, like, where does it go away when it does go away? Where does contentment of you actually go away? Can you tell me a point, like it went away at 4:03 p.m.? Like, if you just try to mess around with that, I think you might get somewhere. But this is really interesting. Ryan, I also want to know, like, how do you so you've got so much inside your head, right? This I ask from a very practical perspective, because I think this helps a lot of people living their daily lives as well. You have so much inside your head, and now you want to communicate that to people around you. How do you have mental models for that? do you have a standard set of rules that you've built, or just a habit practice that you've had which allows you to be so better in communication? Like if a person who's truly creative and they're listening to the show and they have this problem of not expressing as much as they want to, how do they
Mm.
go about doing that?
Good question. It's definitely a messy process. I've never gotten to where there's just a do step one, do step two, step three, and then you're done. And it's a little different every time I try to bring something out. I mean, my first book, I wrote over the course of 2 years, and it was a pretty difficult process because I hadn't done a lot of writing. I'd never written a book before. I didn't know how to structure it. I didn't really know what parts, what type of writing really resonated with people. Well, now I know, things like what people highlighted in the first book, what they really liked, what stood out to them that they've shared with me. And just getting that feedback is an important part of it. I think, the second book, this one, Become Who You Are, it was a much smoother process because I had just kind of taught my brain this is how it goes. And when I have a bad day where I feel like what I've written is garbage, my brain kind of just naturally says, oh yeah, that's a part of the writing process. You're going to feel like that some days. You need to get a night's sleep and then you'll be okay the next day.
Yeah.
And so I think in terms of like structuring your work, what I tried to do initially was create this big, like, two-dimensional mind map. And I realized that that was never going to work. I had like 3,000 notes, and looking at 3,000 notes on a screen is just like so crazy and overwhelming. And so a lot of it was kind of learning on the fly and structuring it the best I could, and then realizing halfway through writing, no, that structure is not going to work. I'm going to have to change it. The biggest thing is just committing to putting your thoughts down on paper in whatever form they come, and you can clean them up and restructure them later. I've found FocusMate is an incredible tool for doing this. Something I discovered when I was writing my first book. It basically pairs you up with random strangers who are trying
Oh,
to accomplish the same task, or not the
wow.
same task, just their own task. So you have an hour-long video call with someone else where you basically just say, hey, here's what I'm working on. Here's what I'm going to try to do by the end. And then you both silently work on your stuff. And this kind of tricks your brain into really doing what you said you were going to do. So if you
Yeah.
said you were going to write a
Accountability.
thousand
Yeah.
words, yeah, you really will be like, oh, I got to write 1,000 words, and you won't stop to edit them, which is kind of the tendency we all have to want to perfect things, and it's kind of crippling. And so it's really about getting those 1,000 words down and then doing it again and again, and then the editing part will come more easily. And so that's kind of the process for expressing all these ideas and structuring them, is just making sure you commit to getting them down in whatever form they come, and then they will take shape over time.
That's I think that's a practical way for anyone to go about. Tell me this, Ryan, have you ever been to India?
I have not been to India. Closest I've been is Indonesia, which was 2 years ago.
Okay.
Uh,
I
yeah.
think you should definitely come here because there's a side to you which I feel you have to experience India. You have to be here to actually live that culture around. And I think this,
Yeah.
like, whenever you plan this trip, it's going to give you answers and maybe a lot more questions as well.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely want to go. It's very much on my list, and I think a big part of the culture would really resonate with me too. It's a lot more kind of contemplative, I think, than American culture is as a general rule, and so it might fit my nature a lot better.
Yeah, I think like just spending some time with people who, so there are like there are multiple places in India and every place has a different culture, every place has a different energy. But I feel you would relish your time so much spending into just the environment surrounding, and also like the spectrum of people that you might just meet here. And I think that
Mm,
will just open you up to so much more of what
yeah.
you've already experienced, that I feel that you might end up writing another book.
I bet I would. Let's make it happen. Maybe next year
Yeah,
is the year.
let me know whenever you are in India.
Awesome. Yeah.
So yeah, like Ryan, I think definitely this conversation has been, we've touched upon so many topics, but I really want to get some more out of you before we conclude the talk. So I just want to know, like, as a kid, do you feel like when you were a kid, do you feel there are still goals, there are still milestones that you thought of that you want to achieve that are yet left on your bucket list, and that are just true to you, and that wasn't something that got inspired because you saw people around you do that was very core to you? Do you think things like those are left?
That is a really good question. When I think about the goals I had as a kid, most of them were either like unrealistic or like not really that true to me. Like I wanted to be a salesman because my dad was a salesman, and that's the only reason I needed as a kid. Well, now, in some ways I'm a salesman because I have products that I promote and stuff, but the kind of salesman that he is, that's definitely not, that doesn't really resonate with me. And so I think it was mostly a process of figuring out more about myself over the years. That being said, when I got a little older, I started realizing my kind of creative capacities. When I was in high school, I started deciding, man, I really want to like use ideas to transform the world, to do things that haven't been done before. And that type of bucket list thing is still very much there. In some ways I decided to write a book because that was the most accessible way to get my ideas out there, for one person without a huge team and a huge budget. But in many ways, I'd like to do things a lot more ambitious than just writing books. I would like to create really, really interesting, elaborate software that can teach people these principles in a more automatic, kind of gamified way. I would like to build, in-person mind-form centers that are essentially like fitness centers or health clubs, but for mental health and mental fitness. And I would like to do these things in a way that we really haven't seen before. And that's kind of the next phase of all this. And so I definitely have some of those bucket list items that I haven't hit yet, but it took me until I was kind of a young adult before those really came clearly into view.
Well, these spark another conversation. The topics you've just talked about, like, creating all of those. Um, I think, yeah, that just sounds so exciting to me. Do you want to shed more light on those? Do you want to talk about them?
Oh, I could talk about them for hours, but I would almost rather show you. It'll take a little time, but I do want to kind of demonstrate these things.
Yeah.
I've designed everything from like the app screens to the like physical building designs for these centers I want to build. And so a lot of it comes down to refinement and raising the funds. It's a part of what I want to do with this book. So pre-order when it's available. Should be very soon.
I
But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
have a
think
million thoughts and ideas about those.
we'll definitely have that every link to your every resource in the description so that people can reach out, and I'll definitely go through those 51 questions for me to go on walks, 81 questions I think, to go on walks and think about. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being on the show, man. It was lovely talking to you. I think we'll definitely have you on the show again for some more thought provoking and more just getting more inside what's inside of your head. But till the time we do that, people can pre-order your book. People can have a look at the resources that you've built. Very grateful that you came.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. It's great conversation. And yeah, if they want, your listeners can go to designingthemind.org/psychotecture. You can put a link because it's hard to spell, but
Yeah.
they can get a couple of my existing books for free. The Book of Self-Mastery is a quote compilation book, and the Psychotext Toolkit is an overview of some of my core ideas. And so yeah, go there, hop on the email list, and then you'll know everything about the new book too. But thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, man.